Grade 10s, here we go with our last lesson on conversions. Well, we've needed 3 days or 3 lessons of conversions because we have metric and we want to convert within metric. We have imperial measures and we want to convert within imperial. However, the last one we're going to look at is conversions between imperial and metric. And nowadays, with online shopping and ordering from around the world, but as Canadians, we do a lot of ordering from the States, understanding how to do a conversion can be kind of important because you might be ordering something that ends up being totally wrong size because you weren't aware of the units that were being used. So, the first two, metric and imperial conversions, were pretty much based straight up on little charts that allowed us to go move decimals or multiply or divide as we jumped from unit to unit. Well, converting between imperial and metric's a little different, but over time there are very set amounts that each represents. And this chart gives us those relations. And what's nice about having a relation? Well, this is really all of these. Every one of these where something equals something is really just a ratio that compares two things. Inches to centimeters, feet to meters. And if I can create one ratio, well, then I can create the ratio for what I want. So these conversions are simply more proportion work that we've done a lot of in this course. Because your ratio 1 will be info from the chart. It tells us the direct relation. And then that will equal ratio 2, and ratio 2 will be the conversion you're making. What is the information you're actually converting from what to what? So the chart looks to some extent big and cumbersome and intimidating, but it's just a whole bunch of little ratio comparisons that we can use for the situation that we want to make. So if we take a look, 1 kilometer is 0.621 miles. So if you've run a kilometer, you've gone just over half a mile. It just tells us how the things compare. 1 pound, you get 1 pound of roast beef. Well, you're getting 454 grams of it. That's really all it's saying. And note that some of these relations get used, certain lengths are used multiple times. We have a meter to a foot relation because meters and feet are similar. We also have a meter to yard conversion. It also gives us the yard to meter conversion, but meter happens twice because meter is the most common measure around a yard and a foot. So they've put all of the relations in here. I'll be honest with you, there is a number that tells us 1 mile equals so many millimeters. But is that really a relation that we need to have in this chart? Is it a good chance we're going to convert miles to millimeters? No, not really. So we don't worry about it. What could we do if we wanted to go from miles to millimeters? Well, if I looked at my charts, I could go from mile to kilometer and then convert my kilometers to millimeters. So there's ways to do it, but we don't need a monstrous chart that has every single relation on there. It just gives us the relations that will be most common. So let's take a look and try some. Set up the proportion. We want to convert inches to centimeters. For whatever reason, 114 inches is so many centimeters. Well, we can go up to our chart and we can look. Inches to centimeters. We have 2 choices. Depends upon which way you want to do it, Both of them will work. Because of rounding, you might be off by a little bit. They won't be exact answers, but they're both acceptable. So I could set up one ratio that says 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters, and we want to figure out 114 inches is how many centimeters. Because our first ratio comes from the chart. It tells us the immediate relation, and then the second ratio tells us what we're looking for. So sorry about that. However, I could also use the other relation. 1 centimeter is 0.394 inches. Well, in this case, we want to know 114 inches is how many centimeters. Same information, a little bit different. If you cross multiply both of them, you can always round to 1 decimal place unless it states otherwise. But for our first proportion, when we cross multiply, 114 times 2.54 divided by 1 is 289.56 centimeters. When I cross multiply the other proportion I set up, it's going to be 1 times 114, and then divide that by 0.394, and we get 289.34. So we're off by a little bit, but it's because this 0.394 and this 2.54, they're not absolutely exact. There's a lot more decimal places. So because we've rounded both of them and we're using them, it's going to be close. If we put 5 decimal places for each of those, I'll bet it'd be dead bang on. So I understand the multiple ways to do it. I will accept either. So let's take a look at number 2. What do we want to convert? This time we want to convert meters to yards. Well, meters to yards, I go up. Because we're going from meters to yard, I'm going to use meters equals yards. Again, you can use the yards and meters as long as you're consistent. 1 meter, 1.094, 1.094 yards. There's the relation we know. And our situation is saying if we have 18 meters, so that's going to go on top, it will be how many yards? Cross multiply, and you should get 19.69 yards. Double check it. So that's how you work the conversions. 3 feet to meters. Well, 3 feet, I could say 1 foot is 0.305 meters. That's the relation I've used from the chart. What are we trying to calculate? 3 feet, and since 1 foot's on top, I'm consistent, is how many meters? Cross multiply, it's 0.92. So 3 feet is almost exactly a meter, off by 8 millimeters. Sorry, it's not off by, it's off by 80 millimeters. But we can see the conversion. Kilometers to miles. What's the relation there? Well, my kilometers to miles says 1.609 kilometers is 1 mile. You might write 1 mile to 1.609. It doesn't matter as long as you're consistent with your second ratio. Top value is kilometers. Well, we have 52 of those. Bottom value is miles. We're trying to figure those out. So we cross multiply, and it works out to be 32.3 miles. So proportion work, we've done a lot of it. It's not new. Where it can be a bit of an issue, like I talked about when we were looking at the charts, is if I want to convert miles to meters. So if I go to the chart, do we have miles to meters in here? Well, if we take a look, there is no miles to meters in here. All we have is miles to kilometers. Two ratios we could use. It doesn't matter which one you work with. Convert to what you can and then do a second conversion. So we have, I'm going to do 1 mile is 1.609 kilometers. There's more than one way to do this. 1 mile is 1.609 kilometers. Well, what do we know? Well, we know we have 1 mile. So right away, I don't even have to do a cross multiply because I know I have 1.609 kilometers. But that's not what the question asks for. The question asks for meters. So now that I have the correct type of measure, metric, now I can do my conversion to metric. Kilometers, hectometers, decameters, meters. Well, kilometers to meters is 3 times to the right. 1,609 meters. Always choices. The other possibility here, just to talk about it, maybe some of you, because maybe some of you are thinking, well, what if I changed miles first to something that's close to meters? What's close to meters? Well, yards is. So maybe you want to take 1 mile and convert it to yards. That's possible. Well, how do we go miles to yards? Well, you check your charts from before, and we know that 1 mile, it says to get to yards, mile to yards is times 1,760. So 1 mile gives us 1,760 yards. But now we want yards to be meters. Yards to meters should be something that we can do. Yards to meters, there's the relation there. 1 yard, 0.914 meters. So if I did 1 yard, 0.914 meters, let me just double check that. I don't trust myself to remember. 1 yard, 0.914 meters. Well, now I know I have 1,760 yards, and I want to know how many meters that is. So it's just a different way to approach it. The first time, we did miles to kilometers, kilometers to meters. This time, we're going miles to yards and the yard to meter conversion. And when I do that, 1,760, and I multiply it by 0.914 and divide by 1, what do I get? I get 1608.64. Really close. But because all of these conversion values aren't exact, we might be off by a bit. I understand. I would accept all the answers as long as you show mathematically your justification for it. So, number 6, yards to centimeters. All kinds of ways to approach it. Here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to start yards to meters. I'm going to go 1 yard to so many meters. And that, because it's 1 yard, makes it kind of nice. It's an easy calculation. What does it say? We just did it. 1 yard, 0.914 meter. So 1 yard, 0.914 meters. But we don't want to finish with meters. We now need to go centimeters. So 0.914 meters. What's the conversion? Meters, decimeters. There's our centimeters. If you look on your chart, twice to the right. 91.4 centimeters. So conversions, proportions, bringing all the conversions together. Here we go. Carlos measures 14 centimeters, but he needs to know his length, whatever it is, in inches. How many inches is Please note this should not say millimeters, it should say centimeters. Sorry. So we want to go to inches. So centimeters to inches. Look on your chart. You have choices. I'm going to go 1 inch to 2.54 centimeters. We know we have 14 centimeters. We want to know how many inches. Cross multiply. We get 5.5 inches. You might have used a different ratio. Should be right around 5.5 inches. Pause the video, try number 2, 3, and 4 on your own. See what you come up with. Go. All right, hopefully you've done it. Now again, you might have approached it differently than me, but our answers should be really, really close if we use different ratios. You're on a vacation in Hawaii going on a mountain hike. You read in the guidebook that the hike is 3.5 miles. You want to know how many kilometers? Well, I know that 1 mile is 1.609 kilometers. So we know that the hike in Hawaii is 3.5 miles. So how many kilometers will that be? Ratio from the chart that we know, ratio we're trying to figure out. In this case, it works out to be to the 10th place, 5 6/10 kilometers. 3.5 miles is 5 6/10 kilometers. Edmund is measuring wood planks to make a chair. He measures a piece to be 8/10 of a meter, but he needs to know it in inches. Well, if we go to our chart, did you see meters and inches in there? Meters to inches does not occur. All kinds of ways to approach it. In this case, if we want to go from meters to inches, we could go meters to centimeters, moving the decimal, and then proportion centimeters to inches. That would work. We could go from meters. Well, meters we know we can convert to yards. That's a possibility. There's a ratio that's given. And yards, well then yards could be converted to inches using the appropriate chart. And in that case, multiplying multiple times to go from yard to feet to inches. There's possibilities. I'm going to go from meters to yards. I know that 1 meter on the chart tells me it's 1.094 yards, which means Edmund's 0.8 meters is so many yards. When we calculate here, I worked it out 2 decimal places, 0.88 of a yard. But we want inches. So now we look at our conversion chart for Imperial. Yards to inches. Well, yard times 3 gets me to feet, times 12 gets me to inches. So I need to multiply times 3 times 12. So altogether, it works out to be 31.68 inches. There's inches. 2 steps. And then number 4. Amy is playing golf at her favorite course. The hole she is playing is 230 meters long, and she wants to know it in yards. Sometimes you'll get to a course, if you're a golfer, it says meters, but we're always talking yards. It can be frustrating. So, straight up, meters to yards. Well, proportion, 1 meter, 1.094 yards, equals, what do we have? We know we have 230 meters. How many yards? X works out to be a 252-yard hole. So, conversions. Proportions, going between metric and imperial. And then charts. Decimal moves imperial or metric to metric, multiplying by the appropriate value imperial to imperial. Don't worry about question 5 and 6. What your assignment is, please, is in the booklet here, page 21 and 22. But also, you were given a supplemental pages handout for measurements. Page number 1 and 2. Page 1 and 2 in there. I really like this question, or these some of these questions in here, because your conversions, it doesn't say that it's metric to metric. It doesn't say it's imperial to imperial. It doesn't state, it just says convert from this to this. And you have to figure out, because you should be familiar, are things metric or are measures imperial? And combinations of these, you're going to have to think a bit. And because you have to think, the best thing to do is to practice. But have fun.